I'm continuing this week with some more information about Nuka-Cola because it is such a wonderful and also big topic in the Fallout universe. That trailer that you heard is for a movie called Saturn III from 1980. And you're probably wondering, 1980, isn't that a little bit late for influences for Fallout? The whole retro futurism thing is based in like the 40s, 50s, early 60s. And let me explain a little bit. You see, I've been doing some research here. I talked about it last week about Nuka-Girl and the influences on her character design and what they were really looking for to kind of mimic. Because a lot of the retro futurism in the Fallout games is based around real world stuff. Like on very early episodes, we talked about the movies that were influences and the novels that were influences in the games that the original creators really drew from. But that has continued with character designs and world design in even the more recent games, Fallout 4, Fallout 76. So I got curious about this. I was thinking about it. Nuka-Girl, very iconic character. She, like we discussed on the last episode, became the dominant, character for Nuka-Cola. I mean, she shows up on the billboards. She's very much highlighted in Nuka World, especially in the galactic area. There are models of her character in the world, or at least they're dummies, right? But they, and then you can also get the outfit. There's a lot going on with Nuka-Girl. So I got curious about this, and I have spent probably more time than I should digging through old sci-fi movies to find what may be the influences for Nuka-Girl. And I started in the 1950s, and my journey has taken me to some really interesting places, thus the Saturn III trailer from 1980. It turns out that if you go back far enough, you don't actually get many characters or many female characters that resemble Nuka-Girl in almost any way. You go back to the 30s and 40s early film, and of course the time is very different there. So I kind of skipped over that stuff. There's really not a whole lot in sci-fi to pull from in the 1930s and 40s because, as we know, with Fallout's influences, a lot of the sci-fi influences actually start in the 50s and 60s. So you jump forward to the 1950s, and women at that time in film were often portrayed as, the good guys, the ones representing conservative American ideologies. It's really interesting. There's actually an article I found that goes into taking the male and female characters from sci-fi from this time period and the descriptive words that relate to the main characters in those films. And the female characters of the 1950s and 60s mostly represented positive words and themes. So, and this would have been positive themes for that time period. So things like motherhood, virginity, positive emotions. They're often very trusting and very caring, these kinds of things. Whereas the male characters, it's a mix. It's a very neutral mix. You have both, like the top two words were like savior and sin. Once you got past words just like men and women, those kinds of things. So the male characters fall on both sides of the equation. The female characters often end up on the positive side. And so that relates in some ways. We've got Nuka-Girl. She looks like a positive character. She's like the hero of the Nuka-Cola theme, right? Like she looks like a swashbuckling character. And so that made me think about Buck Rogers. That made me think about some of these other movies, but I definitely fell down a hole. I went looking for character designs that looked very similar to her. And it turns out that in the 1950s, there really aren't that many. Many times the women are the victims of the alien. In fact, I don't know how many creatures or aliens or robots I found carrying a woman who was passed out in their arms. This seemed like a very common theme for the time. I'm sure if you are familiar with that time period, then you might relate to that. But I came across some that seemed close, but they weren't really right. And then I moved on to the 1960s. And the 1960s is a different time than the 1950s, obviously. Feminism arises, and you end up with more characters, or at least more female characters in these movies that take on these predominant roles. They're not really the victims anymore. I mean, that definitely still exists, but some of the characters become protagonists in their own right. They become adventurers. And that seems like the right direction we're going with Nuka-Girl. She looks like the captain of her own starship, but yet she still has this, like midriff cropped top where she's a little bit sexually exploited in a way. In a minor way when it comes to Nuka-Girl. But when you actually look at the characters from the 1960s, skin is everywhere. I mean, this was the sexual revolution. That you have these women who are either the alien characters in like Star Trek, or you end up with like these short bikini tops. And I mean, clearly the movie industry was exploiting this for at least the male eye, the male public gaze, I guess you could say. But then you end up with some other characters that seem a little bit closer to where I was going. So I needed to expand my search a little bit. This still wasn't really what I was looking for. I didn't find a character that looked that close. We were getting closer, but not exactly what I was looking for. So I expanded the scope out. And it turns out that by the time you get to about the 1970s and then the early 1980s, you actually start to find characters that look like Nuka-Girl. So in a way, she's kind of ahead of her time if the world of Fallout is based on an earlier time period. She's kind of pushing the envelope for social progress, I guess, in that world, which is interesting to think about. So I came across a few of these other movies. So we've got Saturn 3, and Saturn 3, the main female character is Farrah Fawcett, who you probably recognize that name. And I was moving in the right direction. This movie is from 1980. She's got the blonde hair. She has, in fact, in one scene, she's actually wearing what looks like a black, it's kind of a very typical sci-fi kind of outfit. Big shoulders. Of course, it was 1980. Some gloves with some cool lines on them in blue and with like silver on top of the shoulders. And most of the outfit is black. But this thing is super low cut. Like, it's cut very low down to, I guess, the bottom of her sternum before the zipper even starts, because the collar goes so low. And you get a lot of side boob, you get a lot of 80s makeup, and we're getting close, but this wasn't quite it. That was the trailer you heard from at the intro. Then I found a movie called Star Crash, 1978. So this is 2 years previous. And listen to this.
Prepare yourself to enter a strange new world of amazing sights and sounds. Star Crash. From deep space, from the farthest reaches of the haunted universe, comes the supreme galactic spectacle. Star Crash. Rated PG.
So this movie is kind of an interesting mix. It's got a little bit of that Buck Rogers thing. You've got male and female characters in this film, basically on these ships flying across the galaxy, fighting aliens. It looks a lot like that. The main female character is Stella Starr, who is played by Carolyn Monroe. And again, we're still in this realm of these women running around in these like bikinis, basically. She's got like a bikini top, kind of a black leather outfit. But what separates her from the previous one is that she's wielding a blaster. She's running around in space doing awesome stuff. And on occasion, she actually wears what appears to be a spacesuit over top of this bikini outfit, which kind of looks like a plastic bag, but it's still transparent. You can still see through it, whereas the male characters are completely covered up. Wonderful time, the late 1970s. But this still wasn't really exactly what I was going for, right? She's still a little bit more sexually exploited than Nuka-Girl, but at least she has a blaster and she's running around. And this movie is very influenced by Star Wars. There's even scenes with like lightsabers in it. Like they just took the concept of a lightsaber and stuck it in this movie, which I don't know how George Lucas felt about that. So let's move on to some other films. What about Buck Rogers? I mean, I talked about Buck Rogers, this idea of a swashbuckling hero gallivanting around the universe. Maybe there are some female characters from that. Well, it turns out in a movie called Happy Birthday Buck, 1980, we have a character named Raylan Darren, played by Morgan Brittany, who looks a little bit closer to what I was looking for. She's one of the characters in the film. She's not the main female character, but she's got a little bit more coverage, got some swashbuckling going on, but still not really what I was looking for. These are sort of maybe semi-influences, but there has to be something a little bit more on the nose. So my research continued, and I came across probably the two movies that have the most influence on Nuka-Girl. And surprisingly to me, I had to go back to the 1960s. I thought maybe some of these more recent films would be a little bit more on the nose with the character, but it turns out that the 1960s was close enough. And I don't know why it took me a while to find these characters, because they seem like very popular movies. I probably should have gone to these movies initially, but here we go. Here's the first one.
Meet the most beautiful creature of the future. Her name is Barbarella, and she makes science fiction something else. Jane Fonda is Barbarella. Barbarella is a 5-star, double-rated astronavigatrix Earth girl whose specialty is
love.
Shall I tell you what I would like?
I think I know.
her top secret mission is a real wing dinger.
I got him. Good many dramatic situations begin with screaming. Aswita Sonia! Aswita Sonia! Could you hand me a garment?
See Barbarella do her thing with the nice angel. With the warm, friendly Iceman. With the cold, evil Black Queen.
Hello, pretty.
With the charming hand-to-hand Romeo.
Okay, that's enough of that. Now, yes, obviously this is a 1968, like, very sexually charged kind of movie that's trying to get these, like, I don't know, teenage boys into the theaters. But aside from that, you have a female protagonist. She carries the movie. She is the main character, and she's shooting giant robots with her blaster. And she, most of the time, she's clothed most of the time. And when she is, she has a white spacesuit on that looks very similar to Nuka-Girl, or I guess I should say Nuka-Girl looks very similar to Barbarella. There's clearly some influence going on here. So yes, we're chalking that one up. This one's actually a solid reference for Nuka-Girl. She's also blonde, you know, Jane Fonda, like classic movie star. So, okay, so Barbarella, we've got one. Now, what about, now thinking about this, let's go back to 1966 and Fantastic Voyage. Fantastic Voyage is a huge influence on the Fallout games. Everything from the design of the robots to the spaceships to the spacesuits, all of that. And Raquel Welch, another famous movie star, another name that most of you will recognize, plays Cora. And when you look at the imagery of Cora, she is spot on. Other than the midriff, like cut top, the white spacesuit, the belt. Now, she doesn't have the blonde hair, but she's really close from a character design standpoint. Here, let's check out the trailer on this one.
You are listening to the sound of a completely new screen experience. A startling new kind of excitement. As 20th Century Fox plunges you into the most incredible adventure that man could ever achieve. To make a motion picture that crosses a new frontier may seem impossible today. Outer space, the depths of the sea, the bowels of the earth, the past, the future, all have been subjects for the camera. But now, a film called Fantastic Voyage has broken through in an unexpected direction to create an adventure of astonishing suspense and beauty.
One of the miracles of the universe.
Its vital news story sweeps down from the sky. Then it drops the bottom out of the world you know and understand. As a beleaguered nation desperate for survival launches a journey you can never erase from your memory.
We need you for security purposes, Mr. Grant. They know they failed to kill Benish. Security thinks they'll try again, first chance they get.
So these trailers are pretty long. They're like 3.5 minutes, but the next part is probably the most interesting part here. Listen to this.
A woman has no place on a mission
I
of this
insist
kind.
on taking my technician.
You'll take along who I assign.
Don't tell me who I'm going to work with.
4 men and a beautiful girl, off on a fantastic voyage, actually entering inside the human body, exploring an unknown universe, unknown dangers.
4 men and a beautiful girl. Not even woman, just girl. Anyway, welcome to the 1960s. This film, for all of its social flaws, actually has a character who looks a lot like Nuka-Girl. So I think we'll call that a win. The combination between the actual design of the character, the way this character looks, and then also Barbarella being this actual leading protagonist swashbuckler, and then some of the other influences from some of those other movies, women with, laser blasters going into space and adventuring on their own, or at least with their crews. So I think we've got pretty much the foundation for Nuka-Girl's character design. Now, we don't get a whole lot else. It's not like we have video of her in like some sort of trailer or movie or advertisement so much. I don't think we have anything like that in the Fallout games. Most of what we get are pictures of her, and then there's the line she speaks when you're in Nuka World.
Cadets, I'm Nuka-Girl, ace pilot. You ready for your first combat mission?
Which, it's a little cheesy. You can tell that the character isn't like super fleshed out. Really, she was just kind of placed there with a character line for the park, for the theme park. This is just kind of what she says. So that's basically it. If you've enjoyed this episode, then you're probably going to be interested in finding out more about the real world origins of Nuka-Cola and the inspiration behind it. Go check out this video, and thanks for tuning in. Also, if you want to hear all of the episodes, there are over 250 episodes already of this podcast on audio platforms. Just look up the Fallout Lorecast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your audio podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.